Hello and welcome to the sixth and final episode of our podcast series, Contextual 101. In today's podcast, I'm joined by Catherine Cribbin, who is a member service manager at the IAB. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, Dal. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. To kickstart, really, it'd be great to understand your role at the IAB and even the IAB's role within the industry.
Sure. So as you say, my role is Member Services Manager, and I essentially work in the Member Services Department at the IAB. And as you can imagine, representing the digital advertising industry, we have lots and lots of members. And what we do is we break them down into different sectors, and each of us in my department are responsible for different sectors and different businesses within those sectors. And my role is to make sure that loads of our members are making the most out of their membership and working with us to build a sustainable future for digital advertising. I also look after really specific areas of the market. So I look after connected TV, audio. I look after all of our members who are outside of London, mostly in Manchester, to be honest. And then I look after all of our contextual targeting businesses as well. So it's a really interesting role because I understand what's going on at a business to business level, but I also have to take that step back and look at the whole sector of the industry and think, right, how can we drive this forward based on what I've learned from speaking to all of these different companies? So it's a really, it's a really interesting role, I have to say. And then the IAB, so we exist, as I say, to build a sustainable future for digital advertising, and we represent businesses across, brands, agencies, media owners, ad tech companies, and we basically work with all of those different businesses. So the IAB exists to build a sustainable future for digital advertising, and we look after all different types of members within the industry. So brands, agencies, media owner and ad tech companies. And we build a sustainable future through lots of different ways. But one of them is, research. So things like our digital ad spend study, where we measure the size of the digital advertising market. One of them is really, policy and regulation. So really working with the government to inform them on, the industry's view on upcoming, the impact essentially of upcoming, policy and regulation that might be coming to our industry. We also do a lot of events, and that they're mainly aimed to educate the buy side. And then we do a lot of kind of written educational work as well. So a lot of white papers, a lot of creating standards and that kind of thing. So although we are a trade body, I like to think that we're a little bit more interesting than that sounds.
Is it safe to say then you constantly need to be researching and talking to the market and talking to clients and, as a whether it's digital advertising and advertising in general, it's an industry that's constantly evolving, right? Does that mean you have to stay on your toes all the time?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, my role within the IAB has changed every single year, and that's been purely reflective of what's going on in the industry. And even the way I mentioned the member services department, even the way that we segment our members and even the subjects that we're focusing on change every single year. And contextual is an interesting example of that. It would have been, a huge priority for the IAB a while ago, and now it's sort of coming back in the last couple of years, and it's going to be increasingly important as we move forward. And we just see that ebb and flow constantly.
And do you think contextual has come about, we've got you on the podcast today to talk a little bit more about the IAB's Contextual Committee, which is, I want to say, relatively new, right? Has it been about a year? To say a year?
So we started it this year, but we'd actually started doing some contextual specific work last year, and everybody who'd been working with us, it was a white paper specifically that we did last year. We kind of got to the end of that and we thought, we haven't solved everything that needs to be done in contextual, and we've got a load of members who are really interested in it from all sides of the market, and actually it just sort of built from there. So I guess we've had an official group since the start of this year, but we were working on it in 2020 as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of people coming to you, tech companies, agencies, clients coming to you and starting to talk a lot more about contextual than they might have done a couple of years back.
Oh, absolutely.
That's definitely happening.
Yeah, 100%. And that's how we make decisions. We sort of network amongst our members. We survey our members. We ask a lot of questions. I think staying curious is, the number one thing that you need to succeed at the IAB, because you just need to be insatiably curious about what's going on. But yeah, and from those conversations and, just for obvious reasons, obviously, we realised that we needed to be focusing more on contextual.
And what would you say is probably the main purpose of the IAB Contextual Committee?
So our sort of outward-facing purpose, or the objective of the group, is to educate brands on the importance and execution of contextual targeting, and with a real focus on benefits that it can offer advertisers. But I guess there's a kind of a sub-purpose to it, and that's a bit more internal. We don't have this on our website or anything, but it's really about bringing businesses together, and helping them, network amongst each other, discuss challenges, and kind of work together to build sustainable growth for contextual targeting as a kind of sector.
Who is part of the IAB Contextual Committee?
So a lot of people. So I think the
including us, of course.
Yep, you guys. So the ever-expanding size of the committee, I think, is testament to the popularity and importance of contextual right now. But looking at the list, which I won't reel off to you, we've got about 50 separate companies on the list,
wow.
And it's a real mix of ad tech companies, specialist contextual vendors, publishers. We've had a lot of publishers get on board in the last couple of months, actually, and then we've got a lot of sort of channel specific companies who've been getting involved from their own area of the market. So thinking, audio companies, connected TV companies, in-app companies, and then we've got a couple of agencies too. But I'd say we're sort of less well represented on the buy side.
I think if you ask the question who's part of the Contextual Committee 5 years ago and to now, would be vastly different, right? Like you said, you've got audio, you've got probably podcast companies, you've got connected TV, whereas maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, it would mainly have been like publishers, I'm assuming, and maybe less ad tech. Ad tech would have been involved for sure. Since then, there's been a lot of consolidation in the last couple of years, but no, it's interesting now that there's so many different mediums, right, to consume content, and that brings its obvious benefits, but massive challenges as well, as we heard in this morning's Contextual Committee call, where we had different providers from, I think, different markets really engaging and really pushing their narrative on what they think contextual is. So, do you see that continuing to happen? Will there constantly be these challenges of definitions and those types of things?
I mean, 100%. And I mentioned earlier, like, my role at the IAB evolving and the areas that we focus on evolving, and it'll happen with contextual, well, it will happen with everything else as well. Like, that's like at the heart of the IAB, right, is we bring different businesses together and we try and get people to think about the long-term sustainability of that area of the market. And when we had a conversation this morning in a meeting about definitions, and as you mentioned, we've got kind of relatively niche areas of the market really trying to drive forward their narrative, and our role is to think, okay, well, what's the consensus, what makes sense, what clarifies things for the buy side, and sort of bringing that all together. But you can't get that if you don't have everyone in the room, and I think that's why this morning's meeting was really important, to get all the right voices in the room to have that conversation about contextual definitions. And I think the IAB is the best place to do that, to be honest. I think it's kind of good to get everyone around the table.
Definitely, and I think you touched on the white paper earlier, and I think it's testament, there's so many different contributors to the white paper, and you're not just kind of marking your own homework or just working with one or two ad tech companies or two publishers or two agencies. That I think what I enjoyed of working with yourself on inputting for that white paper, it was that we were just getting loads of different pieces of information from loads of different companies within the industry. I think that's what made the white paper great. And ultimately, when you look at it from an ROI perspective, and when you speak to the media owners, and when they speak to their marketing teams, that's the conversation that's always being had. Is marketing goes and turns around to the media owners and says, "Oh, what's the ROI?" And from a selfish perspective, from a Seedtag perspective, we had tons of interest off the back of that white paper that agencies and brands saw on the IAB website. And in addition to that, I know we added a few kind of case studies within that as well, whether it's eye tracking or contextual targeting. And it's great to see something publish and then the results pretty much straight away as well.
I mean, that's great to hear. And I think we'll, continue to publish educational work on contextual. So we obviously started with the white paper. We've been referencing it, so I'm just going to explain it. We've got
that's probably a great place
we should probably
to go,
explain what we're talking about. So we have been working for a few months now on a document that defines the terms that are used in the contextual conversation. Because one thing that myself and my colleague Tina, who heads up our ad tech department and works with myself on the contextual side of things, realised this year when we set up the Contextual Committee is that the conversations can get a little bit confused because everybody's using different terms for different things. And, that's fine and that's right. Everyone's coming from their own area of the market. But actually, if we want to drive things forward and we want to make things more simple for the buy side, actually, we need to get everybody talking in the same terms and singing off the same hymn sheet. So that's kind of like we decided to take a bit of a step back and just begin with the definitions. So we're working on those now. As we mentioned, we had a fascinating meeting about it this morning. And we're hoping to have those launched, hopefully before the end of September, and depending how many more iterations we end up with. And on top of that, we've got an event coming up in November on contextual targeting. So it's certainly an area that we're really focused on. And actually, for that event, just while we're talking about it, we're thinking about trialing it as our first sort of hybrid event. So everything we've done has been virtual, but we're looking at ways to make that our first hybrid event. So I think we'll probably rent a venue and have some sort of streaming options as well. So if possible, obviously there's a lot of caveats there. It would be good to get actually get the contextual community together for that one.
Yeah, it would be great to see the people that we see on the call kind of every month or so face to face. Just generally speaking, it would have been quite difficult for the IAB, right? Especially your events team. There have been no events for a year and a half. Everything's been virtual. So, are the IAB team looking forward to that eventually getting back up and running again and seeing people face to face?
Yeah, I think so. I think I sort of mentioned it earlier, but we're about kind of bringing people together. And I think that's where we add the most value to the industry, is getting different opinions in a room and working on a solution. And it's harder to do that ultimately virtually. So we are really looking forward to getting people together. And, we're like the industry itself. Like everybody loves meeting up with each other, going for a drink or going for lunch or dinner or whatever it is. But we're such a sociable industry. And I think we have collectively missed that. But I would say that one of the benefits of being virtual is that, so I mentioned earlier, I look after our IAB Northern group and our members who sit outside of London. That being virtual has opened up the IAB to them massively because they don't have to travel to London for events. So that's been a benefit. And I suppose you can, because we're not traveling places, we don't have, you can almost have more meetings, I suppose. So there's been benefits to both, but I think overall we're really looking forward to getting back in person where we can. Yeah,
definitely. You touched on it earlier, but about education and how important do you think education's been when it comes to contextual advertising?
I think it's extremely important, and I think it's funny because the contextual space has changed a lot over the last few years, and there's 101 new companies cropping up and all these different innovations and all of these different ways that you can do it.
It seems like everyone has a contextual offering now all of a sudden in the last kind of year or so, right?
Yeah, exactly. 100%. I mean, 100%. And I think what the challenge of that is that basically that makes it harder for advertisers and the buy side to fully get a grasp on what's going on. And I think if things seem complicated, people probably just think, oh, I don't know, like they sort of like bury their head in the sand a little bit. But actually, so I think education on the contextual side is extremely important, because contextual has been around for a really long time, but actually a lot has changed over the last few years. And a lot of new companies are cropping up and all these different technologies and all of these different businesses with contextual offerings. And actually, I think that makes it quite hard for the buy side to get a full grasp of what's going on. I mean, it's hard for anyone. I'm sure it's hard for everybody in the industry, because there's so many there's just so much on offer. And I think it's really communicating what's on offer now is the important thing to focus on. And I very much see the IAB's role as sort of arming brands with the information they need to make the right decisions about contextual. It's not about saying you should do this or you should do that. It's actually like, here's the information you need to make the decisions that are right for your business. And that's what I think we should be focusing on.
It's kind of a question off the back of that, really. Do you think there is a general lack of education within our industry? And what I find anyway is, from my experience, is we're not good at educating peers and competitors and colleagues. And I think information is kind of retained within the person or the organization. We're not really collaborating enough, I think, and there could be so much more. We could probably have another whole podcast about this topic, but I think it is interesting because we need to collaborate more. We've all got the same kind of end goal, really, isn't it? And working with the brands and ultimately trying to benefit the brands, whether it's from a performance perspective or a branding perspective or kind of various other metrics that they look at. But in my opinion, I don't think we're collaborating enough. And then there's obviously the lack of education as well. Do you feel the same way, or do you feel there is plenty of education in the industry? Everyone's, chipping in and helping each other out.
Well, I think there is. I think people are trying, but it is really hard. And I think it's hard to ask questions in public forums, and I think everyone feels a bit embarrassed because there's something new constantly cropping up. But I do agree that we could be doing more to collaborate. And I think, as I said before, that's very much the IAB's role, to bring people on that kind of collaboration and education journey. But yeah, I think there's always going to be an education gap, because it's always going to be hard when the industry moves at 101 miles an hour. And interestingly, this is something that we've sort of looked into at the IAB. So we did a survey on our members right at the end of 2019 about this so-called digital skills gap. And interestingly, so 91% of our respondents put programmatic skills as important to their business, but 45% said that they were much needed and the knowledge was really hard to find. And I think that kind of reflects the point that you're making, isn't it? That it is really hard. It's hard for everybody to keep up to date, but it's also just hard to find the talent as well for businesses. And interestingly, it's the study that we did showed that digital skills are missing the most at the kind of entry level and mid-level management, which I think is fascinating. And we're really focused on it as well. So we do, so like at the kind of entry level, we do a lot of work with grads and people coming into the industry. So we've got a partnership with Middlesex University, where we do getting into digital sessions with them, and we offer free training and all of that kind of thing. And actually, Dal, you spoke at one of our Middlesex sessions at the back end of last year. And the goal of that is really to bridge the gap between the education system and our industry, and actually help people coming into our industry sort of speak the language a little bit more, because if it's hard for people who are in the industry, it's going to be impossible for people who are sort of trying to break in. And the other side that we're focusing on, at that kind of mid-level knowledge gap that we've identified as missing, is we're launching a free e-learning training platform for all of our members. and that will be launched before the end of the year. And it's got courses on digital marketing essentials, which is great for anybody joining the industry. We've got programmatic basics and programmatic advanced, as well as kind of educational videos from people within the IAB business on things like measurement, brand safety, the IAB gold standard, for example, and just some of the subjects that you kind of need to know if you work in digital. So yeah, it's an area that we're really focused on. But I do agree with you. Like, I think more could be done, and more collaboration as well. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think it's super important at the grassroots level.
Yeah.
Universities, schools. I remember a long time ago studying GCSEs or A-levels business studies, and you would talk about marketing, you'd talk about advertising, and I know it's very different now. There wasn't as much digital advertising back in I'm not going to tell you when, but maybe the early 2000s, and yeah, so it was kind of, okay, we'll do kind of a couple of pages in a textbook on radio, if that, one page on radio, one page on TV, and then maybe on the internet there was banners. So it'd be interesting actually to know now what's happening at the kind of secondary school level and then university level. So my background's been in economics. I didn't actually have or do a degree or an undergrad degree anyway in marketing, but I did a master's at SOAS, and there was a couple of modules on marketing, and again you would deep dive into the brands, brand values, and then just touch on advertising. And what that meant was, when I was just looking for jobs, and like many other recent grads, you just kind of apply to everything that kind of comes your way, and sign up to recruitment agencies, and I didn't really know what the industry was, and kind of it was a little bit too late. Like, I entered the industry and I had to start from scratch, but because there was never a platform, or there wasn't the knowledge sharing that might exist now. So I think now students or people entering the industry might have a lot more resource than they might have done about 10 years ago, and I think that's super important, that we need to keep educating, and we need to keep telling the next generation of people coming up. It's not it's not like Mad Men. It's not going out and having a whiskey at 10 in the morning or 9 in the morning and doing a deal in the pub. That may have happened. That definitely didn't happen in the last 10 years. Maybe 20, 30 years ago of the print days, and that did happen, but it doesn't happen now. So I think there is that misconception of that's what advertising is for people outside of the advertising industry.
Absolutely. And one thing I think is really interesting is that I've been and done some talks in some schools talking about the digital advertising industry specifically. And one thing that you kind of come up against, and I think it's fair enough, because when I think about kind of creative, like when I was GCSE level, for example, if it's like, okay, well, if you're creative, you do art, and that's the kind of only option for you. And then people seem to think if you come into an advertising career, it's just that sort of creating things. But actually, you could be incredible at statistics, and it would be the perfect industry for you. And actually, I think this perception that it's just for creative people is, I think that's certainly the perception at school age, and it's something that we need to change, because there is a brilliant job in our industry for a variety of people with a variety of skills.
Yeah, and there's so many roles within the different companies, right? And the reason I mention that is I'm talking to agency people all the time, or client side, and I do ask the question, would you ever come media owner side or publisher side? And they're like, oh, no, I'm not a salesperson. And kind of that's their immediate thought is, I need to be a salesperson. I need to be pushy. I need to be, again, the misconception that that's what a salesperson does. But I think the role of the salesperson has obviously changed over the last 10 years. It's a lot more consultative now, with lots more competition. It's a lot more technical now with ad tech and all the different platforms. So I think that's changed a lot. So I think that's also important to consider as well. Kind of going back to the contextual and contextual advertising in particular, I kind of know the answer to this question because we talked about it this morning in the committee meeting. But have you seen there is a clear definition of what contextual advertising is?
So, as you know from the meeting this morning, we've got a definition that we published in our white paper last year, and I think through the growth of the committee and through the growth of all of the different businesses who are involved in, our group, essentially, we've realised that maybe it needs some, like, a little bit of tweaking. So we're doing that right now. Based on like a really interesting conversation we had this morning, I think there's certainly at least one or two changes we'll make to it, just to make it inclusive of different environments, essentially. So, yes, we will have a definition, and it will be hopefully live, as I said, before the end of September. And it will be, something that all the different 50 businesses on our committee will have had a chance to review. So I think we can put it out in market with a lot of confidence.
Definitely, and I think from my perspective, not only working at Seedtag, but previously working at Spotify as well, which also has a strong contextual offering, very different, because obviously Spotify is audio heavy, video heavy, and it's in app, right, rather than browser. So I think there's a lot of different definitions or different conversations, but what I think of contextual advertising is like moment targeting. What is that person doing right there and then? Is it listening to a playlist while they're at the gym? If you're serving a relevant ad there, that's contextual advertising in my eyes. Again, if you're reading an article related to sports or fitness or health, serving a relevant ad without any other information on what that user has done beforehand, that's contextual advertising. But when you get 30 to 35 people on a committee call, then there's lots of other points raised, right? So I just like to simplify things, and I suppose that's the job of the IAB, right? To simplify the definitions for the wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of an interesting balancing act of trying to make sure that it's as simple and as clear for the audience as possible, which is largely the buy side. But actually for this particular definitions document, we kind of want everybody to be using it, so that those conversations between the sell side and the buy side are as clear as they can be. But it's also about kind of future-proofing it. So if we write something that's right now, but then in a couple of months it's not going to be still correct, actually that doesn't necessarily simplify things in the long term. So it's that sort of balancing act. And we keep talking about the meeting this morning, but I think it was just really interesting to hear everybody's opinion. And what we'll have to do at the IAB is take that away and put it through that lens of like, is this keeping things as clear as they possibly can be? Mm-hmm. And that'll be the filter that we put it through to ultimately make the decisions. But yeah, it is a challenge.
I think with these kind of committee meetings, it's always the ad tech providers that talk. Would you like more of the agencies and the brands to chip in or I don't know, put their opinion across? Because ultimately that, we're all selling into, or pitching into those clients and those brands.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something that we really need to sort of prioritize at the IAB, is actually how can we get those voices heard in that meeting? Sometimes you can't sort of like force someone to speak.
Pick on someone like being in a class.
Yeah, but something that we've done in the past or something that we've done in other areas of digital that we work across at the IAB is, had one of those committee meetings where you get so much ad tech perspective across, which is great. And actually just given some of our agency members a call and been like, well, what do you think of this? Or in other instances, we've had, like roundtables specifically with our agency members where we just sit and have like a really in-depth chat about what their lives are like and the challenges that they're facing. And actually that's been really useful for the committee to have that information, because if we're not making the agency's lives more simple, who obviously have to, deal one-on-one with the brands, like we're probably not producing things that are as useful as they can be. So I think you're right. We do really need to have their voices heard. It's just thinking, if people don't speak up in meetings, it's about, or if they're not showing up to the meetings, it's about thinking about the best way to get that information.
Yeah, and ultimately, like you said, you've set up the committee because the brands were asking questions and they wanted to know more about contextual, and then kind of the ad tech and the media owners are answering those questions, but it's not a simple question and answer, right? It's a debate, or it's a collaboration, whatever you want to call it. So I think it is important there's a back and forth between the different, the parties that are involved within the ecosystem. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good point. Based on what you've seen at the IAB, do you see there being a big shift now towards contextual? Is the simple answer yes?
I mean, yes, of course. I mean, the one thing we obviously haven't talked about today is the upcoming loss of the third-party cookies, which obviously is one of the reasons that contextual is having the spotlight on it that it is. But your question specifically about kind of what have I seen at the IAB? So the kind of data that I have access to essentially is. So we did a survey with some of our decision makers at the IAB recently about topics to focus on for the year ahead, and contextual came out as number one across all of our members. So that's something that we did this summer. Not something that we're sort of like publishing externally. It's just to kind of us to get a steer on what to focus on. So that's pretty clear for us. And the other thing is going back to the white paper that we've been referencing is on our site. So over the past year, that's the number 4 most downloaded piece of content over the past. So we launched it, I think, last summer, right? So over the past full year, it's had an incredible amount of downloads. And if you can, that's up there with things like digital ad spend, which is the number one thing people know the IAB for. We do that in partnership with PwC every year. We've been doing it for 20 years. Sometimes gets picked up by, like the national press. Like it's pretty high. So it's impressive to think that the white paper is kind of at that level in terms of what people use the IAB website for.
So we've had the year of mobile, we've had the year of video, we've had the year of connected TV. So
Here we go.
Is 2022 the year of contextual?
I think it is. It's going to have to be, isn't it? Yeah.
So yeah, everyone just needs to start thinking about contextual if they're not already thinking about it, right?
100%.
When it comes to publishers, are you seeing certain differences of pushing contextual, and in your day-to-day, many publishers and are they frequently talking about contextual, or does it depend on the publisher?
So I would say increasingly we're seeing a lot of our publishers focusing on contextual. So in the last few months, I would say, maybe since the start of the summer, we've had a load of publishers like actively put their hands up to join our contextual group and proactively be involved in the contextual conversation. So yes, we're seeing a huge focus from the publisher side, I would say.
Brilliant. Do you foresee any conflicts between all the different parties? We've mentioned it a little bit already, but everyone has their definition, but do you think ultimately we will come to an overarching definition that everyone agrees to?
Yes. Well, I mean, do I foresee any conflicts? I think I've experienced them.
Yeah.
Not conflict. I think that's the wrong word. But I think essentially, this question is really at the heart of what the IAB does, and we have loads of different members with loads of different views, and there are inherently different conflicts, if we are going to use that word, because of the nature of everybody's business is different. But that's what the committee is for, and as you say, we come up with a definition and we put it in front of everyone, and we work to get it to a point that ultimately achieves that goal of making it clearer for the buy side. So yeah, there are natural conflicts, but I think we are the kind of best place to work through those conflicts and essentially come up with a definition that works for everyone.
So one last question from us: what's in the roadmap for the Contextual Committee, and what work is being scheduled that you believe the industry will find useful?
So in the roadmap for the Contextual Committee, we've got our definitions document that we will be
probably coming to an agreement. Sorry, first, right? I think that's probably
coming to an agreement.
First thing.
Yeah, coming to an agreement. and then launching our definitions document, which I think will be incredibly useful. I mean, the fact that there's so much disagreement in the process sort of like shows that it's needed, right? Because everybody disagrees with how we should be talking about it. So if we can come to a final, right, this is it. And it's not just the word, contextual, there's sort of 12 different terms that we're talking about within it. So, environment, talking about, like vertical or consentless and all of these different terms that we're using. So I think that is incredibly important. We have got our event that I mentioned that's going to happen on the 9th of November. And that will be really focused on educating the buy side. And we've got another committee meeting in September where we'll be kind of working on the agenda for that and figuring out what the objective specifically for like what the theme needs to be. And then, obviously a huge part of what we are doing moving forward over the next year or so is really helping our members prepare for the post third party cookie future. And we this week have launched a user ID hub, and there's lots of information on there about contextual. And we are launching a section on it where our members can promote their own contextual solutions, which kind of goes back to that piece about kind of arming the buy side with all the information that they need. It's sort of like, here's what it is, here's what you need to know, and here are all the different solutions. So that's going to be going live as well. So the page is live on our website, but we're adding the bit about the contextual solutions as well. And yeah, that's sort of it for this year. I'm sure we'll continue to be focusing on it next year, the year of contextual, as you say.
And it will develop so much, right? It's just going to be constant.
Absolutely.
All it takes is one person to talk about contextual in a slightly different way, and it'll just open up a whole new can of worms. So I think that's the great thing about working in the industry that we're working in is it's just constantly evolving. We need to just opening our minds to how people are working and how companies are operating and constantly changing with that.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I think that's all we've got time for today's podcast. Thank you, Catherine, for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's been really good catching up with you. And this is actually our final episode of the Contextual Advertising 101 crash course. So thank you everyone for listening. We may come back and update with new episodes in the future as contextual advertising evolves. And we hope you have enjoyed this introduction to contextual advertising.